By the time you reach your own front door, the back of your shirt is wet. The street did that. 2 in the afternoon, the pavement throwing the heat back up at you, the air the temperature of a room you'd want to leave. So you get inside, and you do the thing you always do. You reach for the little box on the wall, or the remote on the table, and you press it. A hum starts up somewhere, and within a few seconds, a minute maybe, the whole summer is on the other side of the glass, and you've stopped thinking about it. We do that so easily. That's the part I keep coming back to. We press a button, and the heat simply goes, the way you'd turn down a radio, and we long ago stopped finding it remarkable. But cold used to be the hardest thing in the world to come by. I don't mean that as a figure of speech. For almost all of human history, in the middle of a real summer, with no electricity and no machine to help you, if you wanted something cold, something actually cold, a cold drink on a hot day, you had a genuine problem on your hands. And for years, I couldn't picture how anyone solved it. Where did the ice come from? Not the idea of ice, the actual ice, in July. Where did they get it? The answer, it turns out, is that they didn't make it in summer. They kept it from winter. Picture a country estate a couple of 100 years ago. Somewhere out on the grounds, away from the house, there's a low brick mouth set into the side of a slope, half hidden. Behind it, the ground drops away into a deep, egg-shaped pit dug down into the earth, narrow at the bottom, wide in the middle, sunk far enough down that the earth itself keeps it cold. In winter, when the lake froze, men went out and cut the ice, hauled it up in blocks, and packed it down into that pit, layer on layer, with straw and sawdust laid between so the blocks held apart. Then they shut it, not with one door, several, one behind another, with dead air trapped between them, because a single door lets the summer walk straight in, and it worked. Months later, in the heat of August, someone would open those doors, and the cold would come out to meet them, an actual breath of winter, standing there in the middle of summer, long after the lake had thawed. Go back further, and the cold belonged to whoever had the power to keep it. In ancient China, there are lines, 3,000 years old, about cutting the ice in the deep of winter and carrying it down into the ice pits. And for long stretches of that history, the ice was the quartz. Kings kept it. It went to the temple and the banquet and almost nowhere else. Cold wasn't something you bought. It was something you were important enough to be given. Because look at what it cost. Not money, labor and space and time. To have a little coolness in summer, you had to move an entire winter forward by hand and hold it underground for half a year. That's the thing I'd never quite understood. I'd always half assumed there was some clever old trick I was missing. There wasn't. The trick was a whole winter's work, buried in the dark. Cold was so precious that a few went further still. There were courts where a servant would swirl a flask of wine, round and round, in a bucket of water laced with an expensive powder that drank the heat straight out of it. Chemistry, bought at a price, for the sake of a few cold cups. But that was the exception, the extravagance of the very few. For most of the world, cold meant one plain thing. It meant somebody had gone along with the seasons and taken enormous trouble to hold on to a piece of the winter. So that's a cold country, more or less, a place with a real winter to steal from. But it left me with a harder question. What about the places that barely have a winter at all? The desert, where it's hot in the day and hot for most of the year, and a frozen lake is a kind of joke. People lived there too. And what they did is, to me, the most extraordinary part of all of this. Out in some of those desert regions, you can still find them. Great cones of mud brick rising off flat ground, taller than a house, walls thick as a fortress. From the outside, it looks like something ceremonial, a tomb almost. It isn't. It's a store for ice, and the ice inside came, as it did everywhere else, from the cold. Some of it was carried down from mountains where the snow lay, and in some places it was gathered closer to home, in the one way a desert allows. On a clear winter night, the ground throws its heat up into the open sky. The air drops colder than you'd expect. And if you lay out shallow pools of water in that dry night air, a thin skin of ice can form on the top by morning. Not summer ice, winter's ice, and the ice a cold night gives, collected and shut away inside those thick walls before the sun can find it. And then, over the rooftops of the same places, there's a different thing entirely. And it's easy to muddle the two. They're worth keeping apart. Tall shafts stand up above the houses, open near the top. Wind towers. They don't make anything cold. What they do is catch. Up where the air moves, even on a still day, they take hold of whatever thread of a breeze there is and pull it down into the house below. And in some of them, the air is pulled down past water running underground, so it picks up a little damp and a little cool on the way, and what arrives in the room is a draught a few degrees kinder than the air outside. I've seen these called ancient wonders, secret technology, all of that, and I understand the impulse. But I think it misses what's actually moving about them. There was no magic in it. There was a tension. Somebody stood in the worst heat a place could offer and read it. Read the wind, read the water underground, read how much the night gives back once the day is done, and built the reading into brick. They weren't beating the summer. They were listening to it very closely and going along with what it told them. That way of reading a place isn't only in the ice stores and the wind towers. Once you've seen it, you start seeing it everywhere. It's in the walls. You've walked past them. On a trip somewhere hot, the south of Europe, North Africa, the old quarter of almost any warm city, those old buildings with the heavy stone walls and the small, deep-set windows. If you've ever put your hand flat against one of those walls in the middle of a blazing afternoon, you'll know the odd thing about it. It's cool. The sun's been on it for hours, and the stone is cool to the touch. That isn't an accident, and it isn't nothing. A wall that thick works as a kind of delay. The heat of the day soaks into the stone, but slowly, so slowly that, by the time it's worked its way through to the inside, the sun's gone down and the night's turned cool, and the wall lets the day's heat back out into a house that's finally glad of it. It takes the afternoon and hands it to you at midnight, when you can use it. The wall is doing to heat what the ice house did to cold, holding it, moving it across time. And the windows are small and sunk deep for a reason too, or at least largely for a reason. A big bright window is a fine thing, but in that climate, a big bright window is a hole you've cut to let the sun's heat pour in. So you keep the opening small, set it back into the thickness of the wall so the wall shades it for most of the day, and you leave the worst of the heat outside where it belongs. Some of those small windows were about other things, what glass cost once, keeping people out, but a great deal of it in a hot country was simply the heat. Here's what gets me about this. You look at a building like that and you think you're looking at a style, old, picturesque, the way old buildings in hot places happen to look, so you file it under taste and you move on. But you weren't looking at a taste. You were looking at an answer, a whole region's answer, worked out over centuries and set into stone, to a single hard question, which was, how do we get through the heat? You've walked past that answer 100 times. I had too. I thought I knew what I was looking at. I didn't. So for thousands of years, that's how it went. If you wanted to be cool, you read the place you were in and you went along with it. You built thick. You cut small windows. You stored the winter. You went to a great deal of trouble and you got a little cool, and that was the deal. And then, one summer, in a printworks in Brooklyn, the deal quietly changed, for a reason that has almost nothing to do with people being hot. It was 1902. The problem in the print shop wasn't comfort, it was the paper. In the summer damp, the paper swelled and shifted, and colours printed one at a time wouldn't line up. You'd lay down the red, and by the time you came round to the blue, the sheet had moved, and the whole job came out blurred. A young engineer was asked to fix the air, not to cool anyone down, to dry the air out so the paper would hold still. The machine he built to do it was called, plainly enough, an apparatus for treating air. That it also happened to make the room cold was, at the start, almost beside the point. But people noticed the side effect. Within 20 years, that cold air was being sold on its own. Cinemas put it up on the marquee, right beside the name of the film, and in the dead heat of summer, people filed into the dark, not only for the picture, but to sit 2 hours in air nobody's grandparents could have bought at any price. And after the war, it climbed in through the window of the ordinary house, one humming box at a time. And somewhere in there, without anyone quite deciding it, cold stopped being a luxury and became the default, the thing that's simply there, that you'd only notice by its absence. It's a strange thing to have happened, and I don't think it was a bad thing. That cold air has saved lives in real heat. It let people work and sleep and live in places that used to punish them for it. But something did turn over in that moment, quietly. For the first time, you didn't have to read the sky at all. You didn't have to build thick or store the winter or go along with anything. You could just change the weather in the room around you, directly. Now. So, come back to that button. For almost all of human history, people lived downwind of the weather. They went along with it. They shaped their houses around the heat and dug their coolness out of the winter and read the breeze off the rooftops because the climate was the larger thing and they were the smaller thing, and everyone knew which was which. Going along with it wasn't something they were praised for. It was just the arrangement. And now you come in off a hot street and press a button, and the whole summer is on the other side of the glass, and the arrangement has turned the other way round. The weather has become the smaller thing. You've become the one who decides. I want to be careful here, because it would be easy and cheap to make this the old story. Wise ancestors, foolish us. That isn't it. Nobody who ever hauled ice into a pit in January would have chosen the whole winter's work over a button, if you'd offered them the button. Of course they'd take it. I'd take it. I do take it every hot day. But something goes when the button arrives, and it's worth naming even if you'd never hand the button back. What goes is the reading, the listening. That old sense that the weather is bigger than you, and you'd do well to pay attention to it. The whole habit of going along with a world you didn't control. We traded it, without much noticing, for the power to shut the world out in a couple of seconds. And mostly we don't feel the trade at all. That's the part I keep catching on. I always thought that switch was just a switch. It isn't. It's the small end of a very long turn, the point where going along with the world quietly became holding it off. And here's the last of it, the part that would almost be funny if it weren't the whole thing in miniature. The heat in the room you're cooling doesn't vanish. It goes out the back. That box on the wall pushes the warmth of your room out onto the street, where the next person is walking home with the back of their shirt wet. And every cooled room on the road is doing the same, breathing its heat out into the very air we're all trying to get away from. We chase the cool indoors, and between us make the outside a little hotter. That's all. I'll leave it there. It's just worth seeing once. Then the road goes quiet again, and you're back at your own door, reaching for the button. Somewhere under a field, a couple of 100 years ago, there's a pit packed with straw and river ice. It took a gang of men working in the cold to fill it, and several doors to keep it, and a whole winter to make. All so that one afternoon in August, someone could have their glass of something cold. You have the same afternoon, the same glass, the same cold. It takes you one finger.